Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on our podcast. His name is Cody, and I'm going to have him in a second tell us what office he's running for and what party he represents. So welcome to the podcast, Cody.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad to have you. If we could start by you kindly telling us your party, your office, and also a brief biographical sketch.
Sure. So I am running for the Arizona State House of Representatives in Legislative District 13 with the Arizona Green Party.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I'm a student. I'm working class. I've been an activist for a lot of years, basically since I could start voting and getting politically involved. Having experienced the 2016 election as my very first election where I could vote, I was very disillusioned with the Democratic Party, and so I found my way to the Greens, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. So would you please tell our audience how you define working class?
Sure. So at this point, honestly, working class to me is really low income because none of us who are working people, especially here in Arizona, I mean, we can't hardly afford to live here. That's been a huge issue that has been front and center of my campaign is just the absolute struggle of just trying to survive as somebody who is part of the working class, the working poor, really. Rents keep rising, cost of living, groceries are through the roof since 2020. It's one of those things where it really inspired me to get a lot more involved in running because, when you look around at all this, how do you, if you're not making $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year, how do you survive? And the fact that so many people just don't care really pushed me to try and bring that struggle to the forefront of my campaign.
Sure. So why do you think it's happened that way? Some people would say it's because of the stimulus programs. They injected all this free money into the economy, and that caused the prices to rise. So from a green perspective, would you say that's the reason, or would you say there's some other reason with all this recent skyrocketing of inflation and cost of living?
Yeah, I would definitely challenge that notion that it is just free money from the COVID stimulus that is causing price increases, because these price increases are happening either way. This is corporate price gouging, and particularly on essentials. This is not something that has to do with just a one-time $600 check, which is better than nothing, which is what we've gotten with Biden so far, but it's not inflationary in the same way that corporations continually chasing higher and higher profits each year is inflationary.
Okay. Some people say that these corporations are using the COVID stimulus supply chain stuff as an excuse to hike up their prices further. Do you think that's happening?
Oh, absolutely. I do think a lot of the business community is trying to use that as an excuse. But realistically, we're 4 years out from 2020 when this was like really more of an issue. You can only blame it on that for so long, and even when you do that, it really doesn't hold up to logic. It comes down to corporate greed. And that's the big problem that is one of the biggest things that's going wrong with America as a whole, but specifically here in Arizona as well, is that corporate greed is just pricing people out of their ability to leave.
So you said you're the 13th district, right?
Correct.
Okay. So would you please tell our audience the demographics of that district?
Yeah, so Legislative District 13 in Arizona makes up most of the city of Chandler, where I live, and also parts of Gilbert and a small little town called Sun Lake.
Okay.
District 13 tends to run lean conservative, I would say. Demographics are changing, particularly from like 2020 to 2022. There's been a little bit of a shift leftward, but it's certainly not a one side or the other, Republican or Democrat owned district. In this election, actually, Legislative District 13 is considered one of the most competitive districts.
Okay.
So it's really, it's an open seat. There's a lot of independents here in Legislative District 13 and in Arizona as a whole. We do have a big independent voter streak. I believe independent voters make up a little over a third of registered voters in Arizona. And sometimes it bounces back and forth with the Republican registrations, but independents and no party preference voters are really the biggest chunk of Arizona voters. And I think a lot of those people really don't connect with either of the two major parties. And so I'm hoping that our Green candidacy is, while offering something different, will hopefully help organize and activate some of those non-voters, some of those voters who feel alienated by the process.
Sure. So Chandler, the city you live in, how big is that?
City of Chandler is a decently sized suburban city. It is, I want to say it's right around 200 or so thousand residents. Okay. So it's a pretty decent sized city.
Okay. Sounds good. So in addition to the issue we mentioned about inflation and cost of living, what other issues are in your area that you're bringing a green solution to?
Yeah, so obviously to stick with the Green Party's namesake, climate change is a really big issue for us here in Arizona, particularly when it comes to our issues with water access, especially due to our dependence on the Colorado River, which unfortunately has not been doing so great. We're looking at lower and lower levels of water on Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Unfortunately, what happens is climate change and the rise in heating essentially is evaporating a lot of that surface water. We're also losing a lot of that water due to inefficiencies in the way that we use it and the way that we deliver it. And the Central Arizona Project, which is the system of canals that we have that pumps Colorado River water from the Colorado River all the way here to Central Arizona and down to Southern Arizona. It's essentially 300 miles uphill, which takes a lot of energy. And unfortunately, a lot of that energy that's used to keep those pumps running is supplied by the burning of fossil fuels. So we get stuck in this loop where we keep burning fossil fuels to make sure the water continues to get here, but that same burning of the fossil fuels that emits carbon emissions is raising temperatures, and it's making water less available. It's making it harder, actually, to pump that water when there's less actual water in the river. So there's a lot of issues there. Groundwater is another big one. Our groundwater regulations here in Arizona, we have one big piece of legislation. It's called the Groundwater Management Act of 1980. Essentially what this did is it set up, I believe it is 5 groundwater management zones. And these exist in the more central and southern, most populous parts of Arizona. The problem is, once you get out of those groundwater management zones and you're in the more rural areas of Arizona, there's very, very little regulation as far as how much groundwater you can pump, which essentially leads to the people who can afford to dig the deepest well have all the access to the water. So we're really looking at trying to close some of those loopholes in existing legislation when it comes to groundwater management and surface water management, and just really making sure that we are focused on providing clean water as a human right to all Arizonans.
Okay. Sounds good. So does your party already have ballot access, or did you have to collect signatures for this campaign?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story. So the Arizona Green Party itself collected, I want to say it was 60-something thousand signatures last year. Yeah, it was a big doing, and it cost a lot of money, and it took a lot of time, but we did get state party ballot access here.
Okay.
For our candidates in Arizona, there is a sort of quirk in the election law where when a political party gains ballot access through petitioning, they are categorized as a quote-unquote new party. So new party status essentially guarantees us a spot on the ballot for the next two elections.
Okay.
So, yeah, really great, really awesome stuff. That being said, we still generally have to collect signatures for individual candidates to get on the ballot. AZGP has utilized the quirk in the election law that essentially allows our candidates to run as write-ins in the primary election, so we can avoid collecting more signatures for individual candidates. And then essentially, if you are running in a district or in a race in a Green Party primary where you're the only candidate who has filed any sort of paperwork, even if you're a write-in, you really only need to get a plurality of votes. So you can win an election in the Green Party primary this year if you're a qualified write-in candidate and you just vote for yourself.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a lot easier to get us onto the general election ballot. And obviously this is not a foolproof method. We are dealing with some issues in our U.S. Senate primary that you may or may not be aware of. There's been a couple stories from the Washington Post and New York Times about it. But essentially, for most of the statewide and legislative races, this was a path that made sense to us as far as getting our candidates on the general election ballot.
Okay. Can you please clarify to make sure I understand this? So, okay, you said your party got the ballot access for collecting all those signatures, yet you still have to get signatures for the primary races?
Correct. So we collect signatures for the party, and once the party is ballot qualified, then our candidates can collect signatures.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to kind of do it twice. So for third parties here, you have to collect, I believe the current number was like 35,000 signatures, and then to have continuing representation, so to stay on the ballot after you've got it, you either need to register, I believe it is 0.2% of all registered voters in the state with your party, and that'll give you a continuing ballot access. Or you can have a candidate for either president or for governor, depending on which election year it is, reach 5% of the total vote.
Okay. So in your case, your party got the status, so it's going to be on the general election, and you had to get signatures for the primary race.
Correct, yeah. So that's usually how it works.
Okay.
We took the write-in strategy because it costs a lot less money. And realistically, we're not a very large party here in Arizona. We have only got about, I believe it's right under 4,000 members. Not a whole lot of people who are, jumping out of their seat to run for office. So in the vast majority of the offices that we're running for this year, I believe there are 9 total, that write-in strategy is the best way to go. Saves us a lot of money. Yeah.
Interesting. That sounds like quite the process you have there.
Yeah, AZ election law. I've learned a lot more about it than I ever wanted to, but here we are.
So are you running this campaign all by yourself, or do you have a team assisting you?
All of us Green candidates here in Arizona are kind of, I mean, we're sort of each other's campaign teams.
Oh,
A lot of us are a lot of years out from having the experience of actually creating and running a campaign. Most of us are issues-based activists who've come together under the party banner. So we're still kind of, at this point in our history, we're figuring out how to do like the nitty-gritty of being candidates and being a political party, because we haven't had ballot access since 2019.
okay.
So it's been some years, and we've had a lot of turnover of volunteers and stuff. So this year we are doing our best to help each other out as far as campaigning, and that figuring out how it all works and what regulations you have to abide by. And there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that you have to keep in mind, especially when it comes to things like campaign finance. There are regulations on like where you can put up campaign signs and lots of things like that we're trying to come together and figure out, and also kind of archive that information so that in 2026 we're not starting from ground zero.
Okay. So you're in the process, as you do this election, of creating some information for future candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is resources available through like the Green Party US National, but we really want to lock in on the experience of being a Green candidate in Arizona,
Sure.
because even aside from just like the minutia of election law, just culturally here, you know, we've been a fairly conservative, fairly red state for a long time. It's just now in the past couple of years starting to switch around some demographics. So the conversations we have with voters are not the same as the ones that we would have been having in like 2016, 2018.
Oh.
Especially, you know, a lot of people are paying attention to like the national races, the presidential race. And I think a lot of people are really starting to wake up to the fact that, you know, the emperor has no clothes, essentially. You know, a lot of us saw that debate the other night with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and it was just, I think for a lot of people, it was a real eye-opener,
Oh, sure.
especially for folks who are not usually very politically engaged. Tuning into that for a little bit and seeing the state of where the race for the highest office in our country is I think making a lot more people consider alternative options like the Green Party than maybe they would have in 2020 or even 2016, which was a really good year for us.
Oh, okay. That's good. So how are you getting the word out to voters? What is your campaign strategy?
Yeah, so primarily from my filing date to now, the primary, it has been a lot of social media outreach.
Okay.
I found that a lot of the voter audience, the target voters that we're trying to reach, at least for my campaign, tend to be in the 18 to 35 age demographic. A lot of those folks, I mean, nobody's reading like newspapers to see ads from candidates there. They're not watching cable news at the rate that, you know, the older generations are. So we really have to think very differently about how we campaign, because there is, you know, there are exceptions to this rule, and there are a lot of really awesome Green elders that are involved in the party here locally and throughout the nation. But generally, our platform and our values tend to really resonate more with the younger generation, particularly those who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who are minority identity groups. Those are really the voters that we're trying to target. And particularly, you know, non-voters is a big one. And unfortunately, that's kind of a gamble. But But what we found in tracking our registration data since we've gotten back on the ballot here is that, we tend to get written off by Democrats a lot as, the Green Party is just taking disgruntled progressives from the Democratic Party. But what we've been seeing is that the biggest increases that we've had in registrations here in Arizona for the Green Party is among first-time voters, so people who are freshly turning 18, and non-voters, independents. Those are the people that we're seeing generally come to our party now that we're back on the ballot.
Okay. That sounds good. So, Cody, how can our audience support you in your campaign?
Awesome. Well, first thing is we just need to keep getting the word out as much as we can. I have really tried to make sure that I have a wide-ranging presence online. So our campaign has presence on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We are on Twitter. Outside of that, obviously check out all that stuff. We have a pretty decently put together website that has a lot of really great information on it. The big thing we need now, coming to the end of the primary and going towards the general, we really need some more on-the-ground volunteers here.
Okay.
As much as I would love to believe that I can knock 20,000 doors myself, that's just not feasible for a candidate who is going to have a bunch of other engagements too. We've got a Meet the Candidates Forum coming up through the Arizona Capitol Times, which is going to be really cool. That is going to be on the 16th of July from 6 to 8 p.m. So you can check out the AZ Capitol Times YouTube channel, and they're going to telecast it there. So definitely check that out. But, yeah, the big thing is we really need to translate the online support to on-the-ground support.
Okay.
And sometimes that can be a big ask. A lot of people, again, the people who are connecting with my campaign are not rich people. They're not the people who are well off enough to be able to take a day off work and go canvass. So we hit some challenges there, and we anticipated that. But any sort of boots on the ground for our campaign, especially post July 30th primary, is going to be essential.
Okay.
Beyond that,
coming up. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. Beyond that, obviously, campaigns cost money. I personally hate asking for donations. It is not something that comes naturally to me. It is something that makes me kind of uncomfortable, actually, because I know, with my own income, I can't even really afford to donate to my chosen candidates for various races. So I try not to ask for people's money very often, and we've been running a really, really trim, really thin campaign as far as donations and things that are very expensive. We're DIYing a lot of stuff. We are finding cheaper methods, but realistically, when you're up against two corporate-controlled parties that have basically an influx of cash from corporations, super PACs, it's very hard to compete with that just as at a very practical, utilitarian level.
Oh, sure.
That being said, I also kind of take the mindset that we're never going to out fundraise them, so we're really pushing to out organize them. You can raise as much money as you want, but if you don't have the support there on the ground, if you don't have people excited about your campaign, it's going to be really hard. And we do have a lot of supporters. We do have a lot of people who are very excited, and a lot of really awesome Greens around the country have chipped in and donated a couple bucks here and there where they can. and I'm super, super appreciative of that. But the big thing is, from July 30th to November 5th, it's just going to be how many doors can we knock, how many voters can we reach, and how do we make it clear that we are putting forward something that is very different to the politics as usual.
All right. That sounds like a plan. Cody, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your campaign.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to talk to you.
Of course. We wish you all the best in your campaign and also everything else you do in your personal and professional life.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you so much again.
Take care and all the best.
All right.